Analogous Propinquity, that program that seeks to answer the question, when horses run and all the dust is cleared, what happens next? I'm Paul Baker, along with political scientist Dr. Jim Bowers and Arnie Rothschilld, who is a campaign manager, a promoter, an advertising executive, among other things, and as Jim is fond of saying, an all-around nice guy.
But you know what, Paul? I can make this a real short episode because I know the answer to that question.
What is the answer, Jim?
The horses go back to the stable and get rubbed down.
Okay.
Not completely accurate.
Well, excuse me.
And as I said, many other things, among them a sulky driver. So tell us, Arnie, what happens when you get the tack off the horse?
Well, no, the horse that finishes first goes to what we affectionately call the piss stall, where they gather urine for the test. They can randomly check on other horses. In elections, you don't get to drug the opponent, which sometimes happens to stop them.
We should be able.
So,
I think every candidate should have to take a piss test.
Actually, there's an argument for, as you know, for cognitive testing. So they're not quite as simple as they just go back.
You really have to start this episode out telling me I'm wrong, right?
That's a constant.
You know what?
We hold these truths to be self-evident.
Okay, well, given that you're the oldest person in this room, I would go along with that.
Mm-hmm. True,
but the youngest looking. It's been a while since we've been together.
And I'm not even going to suggest a piss stall. So
I'll behave now.
Let's talk a little bit here, because earlier in this podcast, in episode 3, Arnie, you did mention 3 issues that you were going to look at when you were managing a particular race. And that race was decided back in November. And now the question is, what happened?
So a lot of times after an election, you second guess what you did or could have done. And there was an issue looming that in retrospect, if I had it to do all over again, I would have gone on attack mode on behalf of my candidate. And that was the issue of the housing of, or moving to the community of what we in one stage called migrants, and that I felt that there was a huge potential voter mobilization issue that, depending on how you articulated that. And in retrospect, while I think it may have changed some votes, it would have been premature, but I think we should have used it differently in questioning what the impact might be. Now, they were housed on State Street, and State Street was under construction. This is the Holiday Inn building. And that probably was advantageous to those people being housed there because there was no activity in the street. And potentially there could have been significant activity as we've begun to see in other parts of the country. The second thing, and I was reluctant to get into the weeds about it. And by in the weeds, I mean, sometimes when you talk about policy, people don't pay attention to policy. They pay attention to images. And one of the issues that was emerging was how Monroe County, the county that I was running the race in New York State, was going to use what we call ARPA funds, American Rescue Plan money, because there was a decision made that rather than to use those monies to the benefit of the taxpayers, which you could do you couldn't directly lower taxes, but what you could do is prepay expenses with it. Instead, there was a decision made to pass it out to not-for-profits to do social work, but all those not-for-profits were politically connected and contributor-based, and that was a potential point where we could have maybe changed the tone of the race. Now, here's the downside of the things that I'm saying, is when you make a decision to pivot and go to what you call the hard negative messaging side, that's a turnoff traditionally for women voters. And for us to have a shot in that race, because 53% were going to be women, then you're measuring the decision that you're how hard do I go? What issues do I talk about? And truth be told, the campaign didn't have enough money to drive multiple messages at the same time. And you can't depend on earned media or free interviews to do that. So a lot of things came together, sadly. And then in a minute, I'll circle back to the geographies and what I saw.
Just to remind the listener, in case you haven't, you haven't listened to an episode lately, the race we're talking about is the Monroe County executive race that took place in November of 2023, where Arnie's candidate was the Republican candidate in a county that is predominantly Democrat now, but yet the Democrat incumbent at least appeared weak or weaker in some ways. And Arnie's candidate lost, and not that he had anything to do with this, but the Republicans also lost control of the county legislature at the same time. So just to kind of put the...
Well, those things were related in a way that people don't realize.
Okay, go ahead.
There was a decision made within the legislative delegation. They didn't want to run jointly with the county executive candidate. If they had run jointly, it would have strengthened both the county executive candidate and the legislative candidates because it would have defined an agenda. So we are always in a battle for how should campaigns work in collaboration with other campaigns.
This is an interesting point. I want to take this to the next step. And listener, just so you understand, we're sitting here early March 2024. We have just seen basically the earliest general election contest that I think we've seen in at least 100 years.
Meaning at the national level.
At the national level. So let's talk about that. Is there strength in numbers? Is there safety in numbers to come up with a national campaign? Or do we go back to Tip O'Neill again and say all politics is local? Worry about the factory on your corner and make sure that you're doing what they need. Make sure that the farmer out there in Illinois is getting what he needs.
So when you get into what will be called a change election period of time, you basically the difficulty in managing what happens, you've already begun to speak to, which is there an advantage in a unified message? Absolutely. The problem is all politics currently is not local. All politics actually is national. And so you're going to see, as you've already begun to see, a dynamic where they're not going to be able to get everyone marching in lockstep as they should. They being the Republican National Campaign Committee especially. But it also looks as though you might have the same problem with the Democrat National Campaign Committee. So the Democrat president has done a much better job at having the electeds at the state level be supportive of him than what we're going to see in the Republican dynamic. Now, to your point, this is March. So when you get talking about 8 months to an election, I would tell you that that's 15 lifetimes in the way elections work. But I think that for the president to be reelected, they're going to have to really tighten message in all levels. And if the president continues to erode, it will cost the House and the Senate. But the only way that they can win is with a unified message. I don't believe that it's quite the same dynamic on the other side because the top of the ticket is such a divisive, dissident kind of a candidate that, you'll see an opposite effect where he'll be asked not to go into some congressional districts and by the way, the one that we just, where that county executive race occurred, which is the New York 25th Congressional District, that will be a district where he'll be asked never to show his face. So you're going to have two different game plans, and the question is going to be which one turns out to be right.
Well, and coming back to, I agree with you that lately, all politics, at least when we're talking about Congress, the House, the Senate, the presidency, it is national. At the legislative level, as for the House, a part of that is because you might say the track has been fixed because of gerrymandering. So you're going to, out of 435 House seats that'll be up this year, I believe the figure is right around 40. It might even be a little lower, but are going to be truly marginal or competitive. That's where maybe local might come into play a little bit, but you also have the problem, for example, in New York State, the 3 remaining Republicans who are first-termers who got elected in the last cycle are going to have to really run away from the national trends because they're going to be in vulnerable districts. But so, we've kind of fixed the track, which I don't know if this is the best place to introduce it, but one of the things I got to thinking about when I knew we were going to come back and do this wrap-up episode was we've kind of talked about the voter, but we haven't necessarily placed the voter in the context of our analogy, at least directly. And I got to thinking that the voter, in effect, is one of the track conditions that if we're thinking about it. So like when you run your focus groups, within reason, I knew you run multiples, but that's like a snapshot. That's like a weather forecast for a particular day. And by the time you get in farther down the road, the weather has changed, i.e. the voters have changed, the track conditions have changed. So, part of this figuring out the messaging that Arnie's talking about is going to have to read the track conditions very well, meaning the voters. So you see certain things that the Democrats will do. They're going to nationalize abortion. They're going to play on Alabama's recent Supreme Court ruling over in vitro, however you say it.
IVF.
IVF.
That's the easy way.
Thank you. They're going to play to that women's constituency, and those kind of things. But they're going to hope that the track conditions hold up, that the voters hold up in that way.
Now, let me, because we're using this analogy, let me tell you that the way that voters are very much like horse bettors.
I was wondering about that.
They want to bet on who they think is going to win the race. So what we talk about all the time are the undecided voter. The undecided voter will be convinced as to who they think is going to win the race, and they'll begin to align. And I would propose to you that this election is going to be, from an issue point of view, really simple. And it's going to be driven into, that this is going to be a national election of national issues. And I think that what you said is right in what the Democratic Party is going to try to do. And they're going to try to deal with the issues, again, of abortion. And I want to come back to the Supreme Court ruling on what happened in Colorado in a minute, but I think that immigration, and as I said, in retrospect, if the timing had been better, that issue would have been an issue that drove significant voting change, even in the county executive race that I was in. Immigration, and are you and your family better off than you were 4 years ago, which is the inflation question. And there has always been a tendency for voters to vote in their own economic interests. So it doesn't matter what the stock market is doing. If the price of eggs is approaching $4 a dozen, and it doesn't matter if gas prices have come down somewhat, if they're still hovering at a level that's unacceptable.
All right, but I'm gonna play with you on this one, Arnie.
Go ahead.
Because if you look at the reality of are you better off now than you were 4 years ago,
mm-hmm.
If you look at the facts,
there aren't any facts in politics.
Yeah, well,
so there are perceptions.
Thank you, Mr. Giuliani.
No, but it's true. There aren't any facts in politics.
Don't call Arnie that.
No, let's.
No, facts aren't facts, and that's a direct quote. That's why
I know what you.
So,
but that's very out of context. But here's the reality.
Hey.
No, wait. We go all the way back to.
I'm referring.
Wait.
Go ahead, Arnie.
Franklin Roosevelt, running for re-election, dictated what the price of cotton would sell at because people vote in their own economic interest. But facts, and the debate's already begun. Is the stock market doing better? Yes. Is inflation lower than it was? Yeah. Just kind of like, your horse went in 157 its last race, but the track's muddy right now. So how fast can you go in the mud? There's mud on the track right now.
Right.
And this is going to be a fascinating dynamic to watch. But it's not going to be fact-based. It's going to be spinning-based.
So how do you, and now we get down to the nitty-gritty, which is how do you affect the psychological feeling? And this is what it comes down to. It's all about feelings, which a lot of us have problems with.
But there's one emotion that's going to drive a lot of this race. And I want to preface it with this. I agree with you. I mean, I used to teach exactly what you were saying. But we have not had a normal presidential elections since 2012. Okay, we're in an unusual cycle. We're in a cycle that's, I think, redefining even how we have to examine politics, at least when you have someone like Trump in the race. And I think one of the things that can shake the conventional, which I agree with you on, is the two candidates. And the one emotion I think that will ultimately drive the outcome of the 2024 presidential election is fear.
I agree with that.
Oh, I didn't think you wouldn't.
Yeah, but it's fear that goes 3 or so levels deep.
So what are we afraid of?
Well, we're afraid that we're approaching a recession or difficult period of time. Some people talking about a collapse of the banking system. I watched people early on believe the immigration issue was a border issue, and yet you have a young lady. There have been incidents all over the country where there have been deaths or attacks that are being tied to people that entered the country differently than they had in the past.
Can I hit rewind? I want to take us back to 1912.
Yeah.
1912, immigrants.
Yeah.
I don't know where it's
Irishmen,
Yeah.
Italians.
Mm-hmm.
They use the N-word
Yeah.
on Irish and Italians.
So I believe that that this animosity has always existed, been suppressed, and it's being harnessed right now because of a dynamic that virtually everyone, no matter what party, thinks is spinning out of control. I watched 3 very bright women make a horrendous mistake on MSNBC. Joy Reid, who's a Harvard graduate, Jen Psaki, former press secretary, and Rachel Maddow, all very bright women. And they were talking, the conversation was problems with the border and how voter impact is polling that there's problems with the border in Virginia. Rachel Maddow said, well, it is a border state. It borders on West Virginia. And missing the nuance of the fact that someone had just been killed and that the more you hear those stories, this anger and angst is only...
But isn't that, Arnie, I'm going to go back to my question. Isn't that just ginning up a baser level of emotion? And I'm going to go back to 1915. Label minority of your choice, wherever they happen to come from, whatever their skin color may be, whatever their religious affiliation may be, and they're the problem.
Well, the thing is that in this situation, there is a compelling argument, at least with a lot of people, that if you don't have a border, you don't have a country. And the perception is that we've lost control. And again, I use perception intentionally. I mean, a story moved. I've been waiting to watch what will really happen about the fact that they flew 350,000 border crossers that never even got to the border. They air moved them. Back to what we were saying. three levels of fear: inflation, immigration, and the Middle East. Those are all explosive issues. Then the question will be, who do you think would be better at managing those problems? So now you take a look at some polling. If you and a poll that I look at all the time isn't presidential preference polls when we're 8 months out. It's the right track, wrong track question. And that is what is going to drive messaging. So on one side, if you can convince the voters that we are in the wrong direction as a country, that's what a change election becomes. If they believe we're in the right track, I would, and I'll tell you what, we're one terrorism attack away from seeing numbers, incredible numbers that, if you remember when George W. Bush was the president, what happened immediately after 9/11. So this all ties back to the same series of fears that we're talking about. And we are afraid of people from other countries and always have been. Mm-hmm. We always have been.
Xenophobia is universal.
Yeah,
well, there's a line in a Christopherson song, which is called Jesus Was a Capricorn, that says everybody's got to have somebody to look down on. Mm-hmm. And that really does define a good chunk of America, despite our aspirations, or many of our aspirations, to higher values. Again, where I might gently disagree with you is, if this was normal times, I would think Biden is a lame horse trying to run it on a track, and he should be pulled from the race because of his leg, whatever, to stay with it. The problem is, even with those three fears, and this will be the Democrats, I don't know, challenge, but has to be part of their strategy, is that even with those three fears, is to make Trump a bigger fear. And right track, wrong track, I don't disagree with any of that. But ultimately, when you have a candidate like Donald Trump, and God help this country if we have candidates after Donald Trump like Donald Trump, that the fear that he generates among the rest of America, even those who I think share those three fears you're talking about, I think ultimately is a very powerful offsetting of those other fears.
Let me just mention that this is Analogous Propinquity, coming to you from the Bill Moran Studios in Packett's Landing in sunny Fairport, New York, which is a wonderful thing to say.
So
I want to pick up on something that you're getting into here, Jim, and I'm curious what you and Arnie think about. Let's get out of 2024 for a minute, and let's look forward to 2028. What's in the stable? What are we looking at in the 2-year-olds that we might be racing further down the road?
I've got my candidate already, and I won't get her name right, but the governor of Michigan.
Gretchen Whitmer.
Gretchen?
Yeah, Gretchen Whitmer. I always have trouble remembering the last name. She's my 2024 candidate for these reasons.
Can we come back to something he said a few minutes ago?
I can pause. Yes.
So there is, when you're racing a horse, before the horse races, if the judges look at the horse and he appears to be lame, there is sometimes called a judge's scratch, if they think that the horse can't race competitively for any reason. I'm not convinced until you get through the convention that we are dealing with the candidates we assume we're going to be dealing with.
You keep maintaining that position, but
because for a different reason than, because I look at this as a business. So if I lose the White House and I lose the Senate, I'm out of business for 4 years. It doesn't matter who my next entry is, because it kills my fundraising. It discourages the younger parts of the party. I'm not saying there's going to be a rebirth of republicanism. I don't believe that. This election is going to be driven by what we call blanks. And so, we can look at elections like, well, here's the Democratic position, here's the Republican position. By 2028, we likely could see a third party kind of election.
Let's do what we've done before, and let's do a little bit of the historical on this. Let's go back to 1964, if we could, for a minute. And I'm thinking Barry Goldwater,
AUH2O.
Who tanked the Republican Party in 1964. And there were, at that point in time, there were people who said, this party is dead. That's it. They can't come back. The point that I'm making is there were two other streams beside the Goldwater stream in the Republican Party at that point. There was Richard Nixon, there was Ronald Reagan, and each one of them got their day in the sun eventually. But back in 1964, when all was said and done, it didn't seem like there was going to be a tomorrow.
Well, go ahead.
Okay. Watch me actually be a political scientist, listener. There's a term in political science that we would call a secular realignment. Historically, when you saw the disappearance of one party and the rebirth or birth of a new party, that was a massive change. But what we've seen, particularly since 64, let's go up through 84 at least, was a long period of what we would call secular realignment, where over time groups began to shift from one party to the next. So people forget in 1960, John Kennedy got 1/3 of the Richard Nixon got 1/3 of the African American vote. But by 68, that would drop quite a bit. You saw, the classic Lyndon Johnson comment when he signed the Voters' Rights Act of Civil Rights Act of 1964. Well, there goes the South. Mm-hmm. The South began first voting Republican at the presidential level. They still thought of themselves as Dixiecrats, as Democrats. But then over time, they shifted. And you see what you run the risk of actually, I think, with the Republican Party at this point in time is if Donald Trump's MAGA, or maggots, as I like to refer to it, stays in control of the Republican Party, you run the likelihood of one or two things: a major realignment where a third party does emerge, or it becomes, within reason, particularly at a presidential level, except where it's gerrymandered into seats, a minority party that is not necessarily capable of electing president. And you saw that with the Democrats in the third wave after they absorbed the populist movement in the late 19th century. They could not elect a president.
And you're a political scientist.
What did I say wrong?
I am a political emotionalist.
Yes.
And what ends up happening is I don't think elections have a whole lot to do with facts. So the question becomes, in the moment in time, who harnesses the emotional moment, which is what a populist is able to do. And by the way, we did have a Donald Trump from Louisiana named Huey Long. But the thing is that I think that we are predicting something that is too difficult to predict because we're not the same world power we were. We would like to believe we are. We're not the same economic engine that we were. We would like to believe we are. We're in a very significant, at least in my view, economic period of time of flux. That I was driving here today, and I saw 6 Kias, a car that I didn't even know existed 5 or 6 years ago. I was in London, and better than a third of the cars were Kias. Now, if you remember our reaction to go from American cars to Japanese cars, now we're in Korean cars and Vietnamese clothing, and
one of the big fears right now is the Chinese manufacturing juggernaut. And if we are going to have an electric revolution, which may be delayed but does seem ultimately to be on the horizon, the Chinese may dominate.
On the Republican side, I think that if I were going to place a bet right now on who would be the Republican candidate, I would say DeSantis.
You're still going there. You're talking about in 2028 now?
Yeah.
I thought you were
no 2028.
Okay.
And I think it's going to be harder and harder. I think it's only happened twice. Let's see. John Kennedy came out of 3 times. John Kennedy came out of the Senate and won. Barack Obama came out of the Senate and won, and then and Joe Biden was a senator. I think we're going to start seeing governors again emerge as the presidential candidates, not legislators, because the disdain for the legislative process is gone. And I was really taken back by people's reaction to a 9-0 Supreme Court ruling when the Roe versus Wade issues were debated and it broke on 5-4 lines. It was end the Supreme Court. Now we have a 9-0 decision where everyone agrees on it's end the Supreme Court. It's like, what can the Supreme Court do right now? And I thought it was a great moment to watch and read the opinions of very learned, I've been involved a lot in the election of judges, and quick story let me just tell you that when the congressional lines in New York State were originally redrawn, they were redrawn by a Steuben County acting Supreme Court judge named Patrick McAllister that I was fortunate enough to work for when he ran for surrogate court there. And then the decision was kicked to a Democrat in the appellate division named Steve Lindley, who had also been my candidate, and he affirmed the McAllister ruling. And then it went to the New York State Court of Appeals, which is a Democrat and very political body, that reaffirmed it, and that redrew the congressional lines. So I have a lot of faith in the judicial process right now. I was really discouraged, and I think this plays into where we're going in 2028, with the reaction to a 9-0 decision. I was never discouraged about the 5-4s.
Which I will agree with you. A 9-0 decision is kind of unheard of.
Yeah, I don't remember one.
But here,
they're actually more.
But it's nuanced.
More common than you realize. Well, just not a major issue.
Right, but it's nuanced from the standpoint of we have Justice Amy Coney Barrett in her writing almost saying, can we all just get along? Can we sing Kumbaya? You've got the 3 liberal justices saying, wait a minute, we're agreeing with the end result here, but we think the other 5 of you way overstepped.
Well, and the overstep came, in some ways, I think Barrett's opinion, and I haven't read them, but just what I've read in the paper, may have come closest to the constitutional reality, that in effect, they were right to strike it down 9-0. They were wrong in their constitutional reasoning because, in effect, they said that the states had no power to enforce the 14th Amendment, that it required an act of Congress. Having taught constitutional theory and have written in this area, obviously I'm not a judge, I'm not a lawyer, but sometimes that actually makes me better able to understand the Constitution than those who are trained in it. My own pet theory is that no lawyer should ever sit on the Supreme Court because all they do is advocate for a particular outcome of their opinion of the Constitution that becomes their client. But anyway, where I think they missed their mark, and it was kind of closer at this in setting up the condition for elections, is the state of Colorado was wrong in removing him from a primary ballot, because a primary is basically a party function that operates under state regulation. Where they have the power under the time, place, manner provision of the Constitution is to say who can be on their ballot in a general election. And the fact that the 14th grants Congress the enforcement power to enforce the 14th.
And that's in Section 5.
Right, but that is not an exclusionary power. That is just one more point of access. So what they should have done is said, nope, we'll revisit this if Colorado or any other state says Trump or any candidate cannot be on the November ballot.
It was a sticky wicket. Let's put it that way. And they seemed from the oral arguments, they'd already pretty much had that back room, we got to stop this.
Dr. Bowers just said something that I appreciated, because most people don't know that you don't have to be an attorney to be on the Supreme Court. And that is a fascinating thing. Most people don't know that that's the case.
Right.
In fact, the last non-attorney, I believe, was appointed by Lincoln, and he was a doctor.
Which
I believe that's true.
Which we could probably use now.
There you go.
No, that's a psychiatrist.
No, physician heal thyself.
But anyway, I don't mean cause us to drift.
And we've gotten into, no, it's not drift, Jim, because we've gotten into this question of constitutionality. Mm-hmm. And I just thinking about that the other day, I asked the robot in the kitchen, when was the last constitutional convention? And the answer was 1787.
Yeah.
And that's how it should be.
Really?
Yes.
Because the whole idea of the Constitution was that it would change, and the only way you can do that now is with an amendment, it seems, and there's no way we're going to have a constitutional amendment for anything with the divided government that we have right now.
Which also just shows the wisdom of the founders.
So there is no progress.
So I had a
progress.
Again, you said something that, dumbing it down in my own mind, my problem with the entire Colorado, and for that matter, Maine decisions, was how is someone defined as an insurrectionist who has never been charged with
insurrection,
right, nor convicted, and yet that becomes the impetus for an argument to remove them. Within
the adjudication of Colorado State Supreme Court. But that was there.
The judge did have a finding of fact that he felt that what Trump engaged in. So as the fact finder, as the trial court, there was a finding of fact. But your bigger point is still well taken.
Yeah, on what it was supposed to be an insurrection in the District of Columbia, which was never charged, nor was there a trial for that. I'm not defending what happened. I just thought it was a giant leap. Now, to your question, Paul, the events of 2024 will drive the beginning of the dynamic that will drive 2028. So it's one series of events if the Democrats lose the White House and control of Congress. It's another one if they win and maintain it. Same thing happens on the Republican side because what happens post-Trump, and Trump, whether I like him or don't like him, which doesn't much matter, is a different political character than I've ever watched. There's not a whole lot of boxes I can put him in, nor are there a lot of things that I see that to me are instructional about what you do next.
I can think of a couple boxes I like to put him in.
Yeah, well.
This is Analogous Propinquity. I'm Paul Baker, along with, it was him, Dr. Jim Bowers. And Arnie Rothschilld, and we're doing a little bit of a wrap up here for this season, as the political season is, I guess we could say, beginning in earnest. Arnie, do either of the national candidates for president, as they stand on March 6th of 2024, do either of them have coattails?
No, I don't believe they do. Well, if there are any, I think it would only be on the Republican side. I believe that the Democratic, and this in no small part is the gerrymandered question, that a lot of I don't believe that President Biden, if he is the candidate, is going to have impact on a lot of local elections. I think that the dislike of Donald Trump, the person, which is, from a Republican messaging point of view, is to try to separate Donald Trump policy person from Donald Trump.
He's a crazy son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch.
Yeah, and I would tell you that when I leave Monroe County and go to not only different parts of the country, but even different counties in New York, the difference in the perception of who he is so amazing. And I was in Florida a couple of weeks ago, in an area called Winter Park, which is a wealthy suburban area 50, 60 miles from Orlando.
It's Disneyland without rides.
But it's also...
These are the same people who drank the bleach to get rid of COVID, but that was that was one of Trump's suggestions about bleach during the pandemic. But I'm sorry, I cut you off. I didn't mean to, Arnie.
No, it's really interesting to hear the views of DeSantis there and also of Trump.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
It's interesting.
So I'm an ass.
And by the way, what he said, just to correct you, was, well, if we can do things like disinfect things with like bleach, what would happen? Why couldn't you just drink something? Something. He didn't say bleach. Something like that disinfects you. They're called antibiotics, by the way.
I want to real quick, and I know we got to wrap this up, and I'm sorry about
and
that.
And betadine.
Yeah, but real quick. I agree that Biden won't have coattails, but I actually think there's going to be reverse coattails for Biden. And it's going to go back to what Arnie has said even here about locally, about 53% of the election being women. Women, suburban women in particular, are going to decide this election in 2024. And if they go in and they're voting because of abortion and all these other things, they ultimately will vote Biden, I think.
So let me ask you a question.
Reverse coattails.
Let me ask you a question. What if Trump says this issue of abortion, I think we're arguing it the wrong way. And I would be for legislation that ensured that it existed on a federal level within some reasonable time and change the Republican position where they're saying, no abortion beyond an hour and a half after you're impregnated, but also put the Democrat position in a box, which is no restriction on abortion. Because when I've done focus groups with women, and Democrat women included, it's only the far progressive wing that wants abortion up until, no restriction at all, including post.
But that has never been that has never been a popular position.
No, we come back to that whole point of Roe actually set those parameters.
Well, so my friends who are attorneys and judges always remind me that judges deal with the case in front of them, and there were, from the get-go with Roe, there were fundamental problems with the case. And so, but back to my question, what happens if there's a modification of the Republican presidential candidate's position on abortion?
Well, here's and this, it is not meant to be a flippant answer. If you had a rational candidate, like a DeSantis.
That's a flippant answer.
No, hear me out, though. Hear me out.
Rational DeSantis. Okay.
I'm going to end my comments going back to our analogy. Trump is an untrainable horse. He will run the track the way he wants to run it.
I agree, and he's going to try to win the race on the front end. I agree with that.
And so he's not capable of taking that direction from his jockey or trainer.
I don't know that. I've been hearing him hedge a little bit, depending on where he is, which makes me question what his position. See, I've always believed that he is actually more of a Democrat than he is a crazy person. That a lot of his policies, I see him as a professional wrestler.
He's an anarchist, which is what professional wrestling is.
I see him as a professional wrestler who becomes the character he needs to be in the room. And the thing is that scares me.
So when does the Undertaker go from being the villain to the hero?
Well, how about back in the period of time when radio was really radio, and Rush Limbaugh was really a shy, introspective, and quiet guy who, in front of a microphone, became a whole different character. Sadly, we're seeing that in politics all the time, which goes back to my line about political emotionalist. Policy ain't policy.
And why don't we let Arnie have the last word there?
I just did it.
I know. Thank you. Thank you for being our guest.
This has been Analogous Propinquity. We'll be back at some point along the road. Hope you've enjoyed the ride. And, it's time to look and say it's cabbage by a head, it's banana by the bunch, and in the end, it's Beetle Bomb.